thank you so much, everybody, for being here and for listening to me a second time. I will do less speaking, though, hopefully, this panel. But what we're here to talk about is really, as we think about the future of the way that organizations actually deal with the changes that are starting to happen with not only adoption of technology, but also the way that changes things like management structure, who's on a team, how do we work with each other, how do we put people on those teams. We brought a really interesting group of people to be able to talk about this. And so with that, you already know me, I'm Butler. I work at GitHub. And so I think, why don't we just go this direction, and please give yourselves a quick introduction, what you focus on.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for the invite for the panel. My name is Ken, and I work at the company called Smartsheet, where I handle a bunch of strategic projects from inorganic growth for the company to as well as like internal AI initiatives, both from like, hey, what do we think about what AI features to develop for a product, to how do we get more adoption of AI tools for employee use. So quite wide-ranging in terms of scope, but by background, wore different hats as well. So even before the pre-deep learning days, I was a data scientist building models for banks, which is a really interesting perspective because that was like before all the hype wave.
The oldest version of ML in the system, yeah.
Exactly. And then wore a hat as VC as well, investing in AI companies. So wore different hats, but that's me.
Great, thank you.
Matthew Swanson, managing partner of Silicon Valley Software Group. We're fractional CTOs that work with private equity and venture capital investors and service their portfolio companies. And primarily our work nowadays is introducing AI solutions across the board. And it's been just really fascinating to see how fast that transition has taken place.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Isar Meitis. My background is I was a founder or co-founder in several different tech startups, so running tech startups is what I've done most of my career. The last year and a half, I've been doing consulting for companies on how to implement generative AI in the organization. I've done this with very small companies of 20, 30 people, and my largest clients are tens of thousands of employees. So a lot of interesting conversations about how to implement AI successfully across various aspects of the organization and multiple types of organizations.
Hi, I'm Lana Dubinskiy. I work for the Executive Office of the President, and I'm also Chief AI Officer for a stealth startup in security space. And during my ample free time, I also consult and am a founder of Women and AI.
That's great. Thank you, everybody, for being here and sharing your thoughts. I think, like, to start, you know, when we start to think about the way that these organizations are managed, do we, you know, have to have something like an AI manager or someone that has like AI in front of every single title? What is maybe the biggest challenge that you see, maybe one challenge each, when it comes to the way that management structures will change when it comes to adopting these technologies? And Lana, I'll start with you.
For me, what I've seen is there's people who've had AI experience that's not necessarily generative AI, and generative AI is only a few years old. So what do you consider an expert in the space? Do you consider my 10 years of experience in AI an expert, and then 3 years of generative AI, 2 years of generative AI, how many companies I've started? So it's always hard to judge and hire for like a chief AI officer or a manager in the space. Just judging to figure out what are you actually looking for when you're hiring for that role.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I really think that having more than one person and an AI committee is what makes it work better for several different reasons. First of all, the committee needs to have representatives from every department in the company. And so you represent the needs of different aspects of the organization. You also represent different opinions, which help a lot because we're all kind of like trying to figure this out together. And so the fact that I think I know something and I come from marketing, or like, hey, I've seen this other company do this thing, may not be the right thing for finance or for ops or for IT and so on. So you get a lot better opinions when you try to make these decisions. You also get champions in each and every one of the departments when you come to actually deploy these things in order for them to be successful. So I think, so now you asked what the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge is picking the right people, but the even bigger challenge is giving them the resources to actually be successful in what they do. And this will be probably true if there's one CIO and he's the one in charge of it, but giving those people the resources, the time, the money, the test environments, and so on in order to make this work.
Maybe one follow-up about this idea of a committee. do we have database communities? Do we have, HTML committees? I wonder if like we're overblowing this idea of like a technology. And so how would that change, I guess, when we talk about other types of technology adoptions or transformations within the organization? So.
Yeah, I would definitely take that approach of just challenging the whole notion of what conventions we're so used to following. I think it's the hardest thing, is we're kind of stuck in this mindset of relational databases, right? We put everything in a box. And that's
it was transformative when it happened, right?
Hey, it fed a lot of people, so we should be super happy about that. But this is different. If you're trying to shove tables into an LLM, you're missing the point. And if you're trying to structure your organization as rigidly as a spreadsheet, you're also going to not get the maximum benefit out of the tools. So I think if you were to summarize that, we've gotten so used to treating people like software instead of treating software like people. And I think when we start to get voice agents, we're going to have that opportunity to just rethink how we manage our organizations.
So you're probably a big fan of Zoom CEO's thought that he's going to be on a beach while his agent actually attends all of his meetings. Is that the way you would put that?
I think the job of the future is if you're clicking on software, that's going away. If you're talking to customers and empathizing with them and capturing what it means, what customer lifetime value means, that's the job of the future, whether it's on a beach or not.
Ken, what do you think? What's a big challenge?
Well, I think
for management structures.
For management structures, I think there will be an AI committee. I think that is kind of like, it's not, I want to say best practice, but that's what I've seen being adopted across. And it may not be a permanent one, to your point. There's no database committee. So it might be temporary. I think you need to set this one up because it's such a transformational technology. And there's also a lot of risk. And hence, you need that committee, ideally someone with executive position and leadership so that they can kind of enforce in some policy and guidelines. That said, whether you have a permanent AI committee or not depends on the industry as well. So for example, when I was doing consulting for banks and financial services, a lot of their business model is driven by these models. So there will always be an AI committee, but how it's kind of implemented below that differs from company to company. So it's kind of industry dependent, and then within the same industry, it just depends. Sometimes there's an AI team, sometimes that's subsumed under each business unit.
I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the way that, say, user experience has made its, going from the idea of we didn't do it at all, to we hire outside consultants, we have centralized teams, we have embedding. And so maybe with that, like, I want to go to the next question just about how does this change the way that management teams end up actually like hiring people? How do they retain them? And then I think I'm always really interested in understanding how, say, like feedback and then performance management actually ends up happening inside these organizations. What does that mean when we start to adopt these types of tools? And Ken, we'll start with you this time.
I think that's such an interesting question. I think I've been having these conversations with some of my peers in other companies as well, of like, we're just at this kind of tipping point of like HR trying to decide between, do I hire someone someone who has a bachelor's degree or someone with a year of experience but is super skilled in adopting all these AI tools.
So like someone that just uses TikTok a lot is very familiar with recommendation algorithms. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
So I think it depends. I don't think there's an answer yet. We're figuring out, we're in that kind of wave of change right now. That's my opinion, but curious to hear what the other panelists think.
Honestly, I think this is probably the most exciting part about what we're going to see. And we're just getting to voice agents. 1 year from now, we're going to be having a very different conversation about managing teams. And it's going to come down to how do you incentivize those 100x, not the 10x people. There are people in every company that are just exceptional at what they do, but they're not aligned with value creation. And the more we use AI to help measure customer lifetime value, the more we'll be able to attribute that to the people who deserve it. And that's going to drive productivity to a whole nother level.
Great point. I'll take that to the next step, and I'll try to answer a question as far as what's more important, whether it's experience or capability to adapt. I think the speed in which things are moving are going to be the biggest challenge for any company. I think large companies who will not be able to adapt to speed, and by definition, the larger you are, the harder it is to become, the harder it is to do. It's going to be a bloodbath, because smaller organizations with 1% of the number of your employees and 1% of your resources within a few years will be able to do the same thing that you do, as good as you, at significantly better margins and significantly better efficiencies. To do that, you need people who know how to adapt fast and that know how to use these tools in the most effective way. Now, yes, you need the right background, you need the right experience, you need the right knowledge in your industry. And by the way, over time, that will decrease as well. But as far as you need to look for those people who have the experience, but that also are geeks who are interested in tech, who can run very quickly, who can figure out new technology and move ahead with it. Because then again, and there's already examples, right? We've seen Klarna March of last year, so a year and a half ago, say, oh, we just have a chatbot that does what 700 full-time employees did a month ago. And we have Moderna who's doing this with research, and we have there's multiple examples of large companies who has went all in on this and are getting the benefits. Now, what does that mean from a social perspective, from an economical perspective? I don't want to get into that. From a company perspective, I think the answer is find people who are talented in this, who will adapt fast, who can use these tools.
Well, I want to see the CSAT scores on that Klarna customer support line, but we can keep moving on. Yeah, what do you think?
I definitely agree that you need to be hiring employees that you can upskill, that adapt quick, but do have experience. If you don't have experience in product marketing, whatever role you're hiring for, you're not just upskilling them in AI or the next hottest tech. You're upskilling them in what should have been years and years of experience understanding the field. So I also agree that small companies are much quicker and nipping at the heels of large corporations because it's much easier to upskill a much smaller set of employees. It's cheaper, it's easier, and then you can also make sure you're more hands-on, hiring people who are more willing to be upskilled and willing to be trained and are looking to increase their skill set.
I mean, when we talk about upskilling and expertise here, it feels like what we're talking about is using the tools rather than expertise inside of a domain or practice, though. Because if you look at a lot of the research Ethan Mollick has done, right, he says that the people that are generalists or people that are getting started get much bigger help when it comes to the way that they use these tools, whereas experts see most of the output as bullshit. And so, or not bullshit, but it's just middling, right? If I ask a model to create a spec or a PRD, it tends to just come up with old ideas that have just been recycled and re-summarized, for example. So maybe that, if I could just get a little bit more clarification, what do you mean, and actually what all of you mean when we talk about expertise here, and maybe differentiating between that and the idea of a generalist in a one-person company using these tools to up-level everything else that they're not good at, I guess. How does that change things?
For me, it's expertise in your field like product, and then being training yourself or getting additional experience in AI, whether it's regular AI, generative AI, but really not asking AI to do your PRD. Hopefully you already had years of experience doing that, but really trying to extrapolate ideas, data, user research, understanding customer sentiment, really using an AI in a way that just took away your tasks that nobody should really be spending a lot of time on at this point. AI can do those tasks and let you focus on what's the North Star for your product. Where should you be taking the company? What are you getting ROI-wise based on something you're doing? So really, that's what I see as upskilling.
Because will we start to see, I guess, on everybody's resume in the skills section, right next to Excel and Word, there will be Gen AI, I guess. And we were just talking about this a little bit earlier about how maybe the way this changes software applications inside of organizations is, does it turn everything into that custom spreadsheet that someone created, or is it more about agents? And so I'd love to hear, as we kind of continue down in this line of discussion, what do you think about that?
So I want to touch on 2 points. One, Cassie Kozikov, who used to be the chief decision officer at Google, whatever that means, but obviously it means she's way smarter than me. But she has a very famous lecture about thinking versus thunking, where she basically said everybody's job, part of it is thinking, and part of it is thunking, which is a word she made up, which means everything that's not thinking. And writing a PRD, the writing of the PRD is thunking. the figuring out what's important that needs to go into it and understanding the client and understanding how my team operates, that's the thinking part. And I think that's the type of people who want to look. People who can think fast and then knows how to delegate to agent, to tools, the other stuff. But the other thing, I just want to piggyback from a human perspective, as far as something I focus a lot with my clients, and that has to do with what you said about Ethan Mollick's thing about the inequality of benefits of using AI. So those of you who don't know the research, it's basically saying that people who are bottom performers get a huge increase in results when using AI versus people who are top performers are getting just a little bit of benefit from using AI. And what that basically means, if you aggregate that to the company level, it means that the gap in the delivery and the quality of the delivery between companies is going to shrink. Because the aggregate power of that is companies who are bound down here are going to go here, and companies who are up here are going to go here. So the differentiators are going to be significantly smaller between companies in their ability to develop quality work, whether it's services or products. What that means is that the biggest differentiator between companies, is going to go back to what my colleague here said, is human relationships. We need, in this new era of AI, to invest a lot more, and it was really important before, but a lot more in human relationships.
I thought managers were already investing so much into this.
What is it?
I thought managers were already investing so much into this.
So, but let's look at the reality, though, right? Like, what does an office worker do today, right? It's going in at a desk and clicking around. And,
well, and being in meetings 70% of the time, I think, was the recent study. So, yeah.
There is that productivity boom going on for sure. But outside of that, it's a lot of work that, again, 1 year from now, you'll never have to log into Salesforce again. And if you think about it, like, why were you ever doing it? Because we just didn't have the tech. It's coming fast. And so what's left, right? What are the skills of the future? It's not going to be, I'm an expert Salesforce administrator or a LinkedIn ad campaign creator. It's going to be, I go out in the field. I move with my customers. I know exactly what they're going to do next, and we're going to win because we're going to get ahead of it.
I mean, that definitely changes a lot of business models around metered and or licensing. So it feels like that will be a pretty big upheaval. I mean, Ken, what do you think about this question? Maybe getting back to how does this actually change the way that, we end up, I guess we end up working in general? Like, how does that impact this? And maybe expertise. I mean, I still think that expertise question is an important one.
Yeah. I think the use of the tools like ChatGPT will just be like, can you use Word, Excel, and so on, right? And the research from Ethan Mollick, I think, is great, but I think it was done when ChatGPT was new. No one really knew how to use it yet. And
the experts didn't know how to use it to their advantage, maybe, as far as like simulating their work, I guess.
Exactly.
Something else.
So I think we'll see a couple of years from now, like, I think the skill of usage of ChatGPT should increase, and I'm curious what the results will be once it's redone. But I think it also means that...
I think Anthropic hopes something else, but yes, I understand what you're saying.
Exactly. But there's also the point that was alluded to earlier of, like, for executives, the domain experts, they're not about producing the output. The roles are not defined by producing copy or the next marketing campaign. It's about making decisions, making trade-offs. And so once they're freed from all those more drudgery work, they can just focus on making decisions, which I think the use of ChatGPT can't, at least not yet, we don't know, can't do yet. So I think the expertise around the context and the constraints of the business case or business problem still is super important.
Well, and let's start to talk about other expertise or practices that are part of teams. And so things like HR, legal, privacy, security. I would even say maybe, I'm kind of breaking my own thought about the responsible AI role within these organizations, right? How do we start to understand how we include them? How are they evolving their role within these teams? And how do managers, or I guess people that are managing a whole group of people, how should they think about working with those practices, especially in this? Because I mean, legal is a great example of there's now going to be a patchwork around the world, not only just in the US, but worldwide when it comes to privacy regulation, Gen AI regulation with the EU Act. And so how do you think about that? Maybe start with how that changes with those types of roles.
I guess, is the question like how managers should adopt to their team adopting these tools?
Yeah, and how should they plan on setting up charters with those teams or dependencies or things like that? And if anybody wants to go too while he's thinking, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's going to be a pattern emerging here. Whatever the job is being done today, you just have to think about it differently. Like a lot of legal work is cleaning up messes that should have never been there. And ChatGPT gives us a window into AI, but it's not in your environment. And that's where we're heading, is being able to model your customers so that AI agents can simulate what they're going to do next. And if you just think of it that way, it almost preempts 90% of the work that we do, which is just inefficient, I guess. But that's kind of the paradigm shift taking place.
Lana, yeah.
What I see is, for especially enterprise level companies, they really need to be creating, as they grow their AI efforts, very strict governance that they create, and later they can change if need be. But AI touches every field. In marketing, there's definitely AI. In compliance, AI will take place. We are using AI for compliance heavily. Legal, of course. Security, we've just seen the presentation. Data, the same thing. Data is feeding your AI loop here. And so it's really important to understand that every part of the company will touch AI, either serve it or have it serve them in a certain way. So really having governance set into place of how to use it, who has access to what, and who is able to make decisions, that is what's going to successfully drive it going further, where there's no one single person making a decision in a silo that may be against what someone in a different part of the organization is thinking of doing.
I mean, it sounds like you're trying to reimagine the way that power structures work inside of organizations too, which seems really like a tricky job, I guess.
So I think there are two very different time frames that each organization has to work in right now. One is the immediate future. When I say the immediate future, is the next 6 to 12 months. In those 6 to 12 months, you need to build committees, you need to define guidelines, you need to deploy technology, you need to understand how to train people. But every organization has to think about the 3 years, 5 years timeline, where presumably, based on people who are way smarter than me, we're going to have AGI. Presumably, based on these people, that AGI...
I should have said this earlier. One of the words that's not allowed here is AGI.
AGI. Okay. We're not going to talk about AGI. Whoever's taking protocol, delete that from the thing. I didn't say that. No, but way more advanced AI capabilities that will be able to do a lot more of human work that can be done today in a very seamless way, participating just like a human participant in an organization. So it's not going to be a silo of we're going to give it to the machine and wait for it to give us a thing. It's going to be employees in the company just like anybody else. And it sounds science fiction right now, but I had to, because I'm here in San Francisco, I had the opportunity, rode in one of those driver.
Hopefully it was Waymo and not
Waymo.
Cruise.
It was a Waymo, and that didn't sound logical to me while I'm sitting in the car and there's nobody driving. I'm like, I assume I'll make it to the hotel later today. But the same way, we got to think about our workforce. Our workforce in the next 3 to 5 years is going to be dramatically different, which means we need different governance structures, which means we need different ways to manage people. And because it's not going to be just people.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that, because I think, you referenced something like Klarna, where they want to basically reduce the workforce based on using these types of tools today. I guess if we're saying that sometimes it's going to replace jobs, sometimes it's going to assist or improve the way the impact that a job will have, maybe even the idea of creating new jobs, like, maybe prompt engineering certifications are going to be the thing to do for the next 10 years. I doubt it, but maybe. So I guess the question is, with all this money that is either being saved, right, because we've replaced people with technology, or we've modified them to be so way out of impact, right? Where does that money go? And then also, how do we deal with the fact that there's really an issue around probably most of the things that are automation should take care of the bullshit parts of the job rather than the meaningful ones? And so how do we contend with that inside of an organization?
I'm just going to say the money is going towards your data storage and AI.
It's going to go to inference costs and CPUs and water and energy, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's going to be a line item. But again, I go back to an earlier topic, which is, if you look at how we work in nature, it's a power law. It's not averages. If you look at a 3-point hit rate, Steph Curry is not just slightly better, he's exceptionally better. And he gets paid accordingly. And that's, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see a lot of the really gifted people get recognized for the value they're creating. And if they aren't, they're going to now have the tools to go earn their value in the marketplace. So they're going to get very competitive for exceptional talent.
Well, but so how do we deal with the fact that, you know, I don't know, maybe I believe that every human being is value. So does that mean that if you're not the 1 out of the 7 billion people that can hit their three-pointer like Curry, what do you do with your life then? What do you find meaning in this world? And how do you work for organizations then?
I think we're going into a completely uncharted territory from a social perspective. And that's maybe not the forum to talk about this, but I think that's where we're going, right? We're going into an environment where you're asking me where the money will go. Sadly, I think we know where it will go, but I think where it will need to go is to figure out how do we run our lives. Because if we're running into a situation where an organization of 3 people can do the work of 400, then what does the other people do? But I want to go back to making it tangible for organizations for a second. There are 2 options, right? And it's an option that every leader here has to ask themselves. Can I grow my business at or above the rate of the savings that I'm making, right? So if I have 700 employees and now I can do the same work with 500 employees, can I increase my revenue by whatever the math is, 30% or more? If I can find ways, if I have flexibility in my market to grow by 30%, go invest with those additional 200 employees to growing your business by 30%. If you cannot, sadly or happily, depending who you ask, we live in a capitalistic world, and those people will go. Now the question is, what happens with these people? What do we do with them as a society, and not just within the organization? And when I say we're looking into a big social shift, I think that's what I mean.
Yeah, I do think, to the question again, where the money will go, I think it'll just be reinvested back into the company. Again, I'm thinking more from a company level. I think it's an entirely interesting question about the social aspects of it.
We're going to have a philosophical discussion after a couple beers. So, yeah.
Later. It's because I think there's always, all companies and even government agencies work within a set of constraints, and if they can serve more people, they would always do so, right? Can I serve more patients in the hospital? Can I sell more software? So they'll always just try to reinvest it into that, something that'll help them grow. That said, there is again the question of what happens to those who had to rotate out of the workforce. But again, like I said, we'll discuss it after beers.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think there's something interesting too about, like, if we're just talking about tracking work inside of an organization as being something that's automatable, if we can then start to look at the performance of people based on maybe more subjective things that are then automated, it feels like middle management ends up getting way more impacted than, say, people that are workers or someone else, right? And maybe like in an uplifting thing, because I know just we have a little bit of time, if you could give me just like a really quick kind of idea about what is maybe a positive thing that you're seeing for managers that are coming in the next 6 to 12 months because of the adoption of these technologies. I'd love to hear that. Lana, we'll start with you.
There's definitely a lot of positives. A lot of it has to do with, again, freeing up your time to make decisions and not doing a lot of the mundane work. There's positives in biomed, where we can much faster get to lab testing for different cures because of AI. So there are so many positives here, and yes, there will be some people, unfortunately, that will be misplaced in work. But there's also a lot of data that shows hundreds of thousands more jobs will be created. And there's certain data that shows more jobs will be created than jobs lost. So I think sometimes people look at it as doom and gloom. On the other hand, more people will get to do jobs they will truly enjoy, not just mundane jobs. Roomba can wash your floors now. Not a job I'm envious it took. Thank you, Roomba.
That's true. We can talk more about Roomba later. Let's get one sentence each, because I know we're just running out of time. Please.
Sure.
Thank you.
To piggyback on what I said before, I think in the next 6 to 12 months, there's a huge opportunity for every business to do dramatic growth compared to your competition if you know how to leverage these tools and this technology quickly.
Thank you.
Punchline, we all got hit in the face with pandemic and had to question, what are we doing in life? And I think that's about to happen again, and that can be positive depending on what you do with that.
I think thinking about the present, I'm just super excited that curious people have an AI they can just ask any question they want to without having to be conscious about annoying the other person. Like, just talk to ChatGPT.
Well, thank you. I mean, I definitely agree. I think there's something really exciting. I think the problem is like who is actually being asked to adopt these tools versus who should be adopting these tools. And so we'll see where that goes. But I want to give a round of applause to our panelists, please, and thank you very much.